So kia ora koutou. This Fee Graham from the RTRU in this first part of the presentation is going through our coursework options with with us here at the RTRU. We are an interprofessional postgraduate program that works with people from within the from actually a wide range of sectors. So a lot of our students are from the allied health community, but we always have quite a large contingent of about a fifth of our students are from outside of the health sciences. They might be in complementary medicine or interested in moving into the consumer advocacy space, all sorts of things. So it's a fantastic melting pot of people, and we have really different kinds of conversations to what you might normally have around when you're with your immediate peer group. We are a unit within the Department of Medicine based out of the University of Otago, Wellington, and we are made up of a team of interprofessional staff. This moves around a little bit, but this is our current team there. So I am an occupational therapist by background. We have Rob Griffith, who's a vocational rehabilitation physician, and Mark Weatherall, who is a gerontologist on the team. Hem Devon, Jean and Rochelle all come from physiotherapy backgrounds and each have their distinct specialties. And so as specialties do relate quite a bit to the specialist papers that we offer. So we offer a range of postgraduate courses. They're all 30-point courses. Now all programs in New Zealand, all tertiary education is under the same points system. So whatever paper you've taken, whether it's at a polytech or another university, it would have had a number of points associated with it, and that is the same unit or metric used across all New Zealand institutions, which means that courses are interrelatable between programs and universities or polytechs. You can go between institutions and cross credit work that you've done elsewhere. So we run a pretty wide range of papers, to be honest, for a relatively small unit. Our core, so they're either run in first semester starting at the end of February or second semester starting in mid-July. And each running for 3 months, each semester running for 3 months. None of our courses include an exam. Most of them have 3 assignments within the course, and the vast majority of the assignments are very embedded in the rehabilitation contexts. So the students' context. So they're designed so that the students can apply the knowledge into their environment through doing the assignment. Many of the assignments are useful products for continuing on the work that you're already doing. And many of the students' assignments, they go forward and either present them in conference presentations or submit them as business proposals in their places of work, or revise policy based on a condensed literature review that they've ended up doing in their assignments. So there's not too many of the sort of essays that the lecturer reads and then puts in their drawer and nobody sees again. Not too much of that within the RTRU, very much about applied knowledge. So across all of our qualifications, we have one core paper, which is a generic paper around rehabilitation principles. We all kind of take turns at teaching this one, and at the moment it's Jean's turn. It's a fantastic, really broad spread, and Laura, if you've studied with us before, or Emily, anyone else, feel free to stick your opinion in the chat and show them how we roll at the RTRU by contesting anything I'm saying and putting your own slant on it. We're all about diverse perspectives, right? And so the topic titles there really speak to themselves. if you want to know more, just look up the particular paper code. If you just literally Google the paper code, REHB, and then the number, it will come up with a synopsis of the that paper. And if you want to know more, then you contact the lecturer. There is a limit to how much detail we put about how the course rolls for IP reasons on the internet, but do contact us if you want to know more. So just keep those topics in mind for now. I am really happy to share you a copy of the presentation at the end of the night too, so you can work your way through it. And I do have a series of useful links at the end. But to help you make sense of how those papers fit in, this slide shows you what I mean by that word staircase that I used a moment ago. So all of our qualifications sort of staircase on top of each other. You can, our most basic qualification is a postgraduate certificate, which involves 2 30-point papers. And so it's a bit like a pick and mix. You choose which papers you would like to do based on what topics you're interested in with all of our coursework. Remember that 701, REHB 701, our core paper, that has to be one of your choices. That's the only criteria really around our qualifications, unless you have done the 2-paper combination out of AUT, which we regularly recognise as prior learning because it overlaps quite a lot with what we're offering here. Their paper sizes are different, and so you need to do a bit of a match up of their papers, but that is possible as well. So if you have a postgraduate certificate from somewhere else, it's very easy to, but you've decided you wanted an RTRU postgrad diploma, it's very easy to go through a process of cross-crediting for that if it has some relevance to rehabilitation. If it was in fine arts or something, or engineering, that might be a little bit of a squeeze, but if it's anything related to the health sciences, we're usually able to at least recognise some of it. So if you can actually also do 1 paper with us and come away with a certificate of proficiency. So 1 paper. In that case, you can choose any one of our papers. I'm not interested in anything else, Fee. I'm just really like the idea of psychological factors and rehabilitation. That's all I want to do. You can actually do that. The university tends to be a little discouraging of that because they like to see you go through with a kind of unit of study. But you can do that, and if you change your mind later, you can switch that out for one of our other certificates or diplomas as well. So it is an option. It's just a little bit more paperwork. So you can also start directly into a postgrad diploma and then pick your 4 papers and away you go. So 30 points is generally considered half time. If you think about your average fairly disorganized 18-year-old at their first year of university, 60 points would be considered a full course of study. They are a substantially sized papers, but it does mean you get through your qualification much more quickly than you would at a lot of other institutions. So how much work is it really? It depends on whether you're going for a C or an A. I would say that the students that study with us that get in the A grade range tend to study, 2 to 3 nights a week and a day to a day and a half in the weekend. Emily, anything you'd like to second on that, or say contest? she's kind of nodding. And as I say, and it varies depending on how new you are to study, how long since you studied. So that makes a difference to your familiarity with the use of technology through the way technology is used in higher education these days, databases for searching research and that sort of thing. The other thing to mention too about REHB 701, or B, sorry, they changed the code a couple of years ago. It's B, isn't it? Yeah. That 701 paper there that Jean's teaching, in it, we are mindful that many of the students that take that paper, this is the first study that they do. So it is much more scaffolded engagement and study than some of our other papers. But we're renowned for our supportiveness and our flexibility. We're kind of a boutique unit, if you like, in rehabilitation. So we do tend to give quite personalised support. And you know, if students are putting in the effort, then we tend to put in the effort too. We do draw the line at writing your assignments for you, but you know, if you are needing that help to move forward, it's definitely there. At the University of Otago, we also have a really high level of support available from the specialist librarians. So we have a librarian, Donna Tetchins, who specialises in rehabilitation research, and she's absolutely brilliant at supporting students right at your first coursework assignments, helping you to ask answerable research questions and get quite containable searches, so you're not getting overwhelmed by this huge amount of literature. And we also have some fantastic learning support available. There's currently a lady called Ruth Tuamu. She's absolutely brilliant, and she'll walk you through how to write a paragraph. If you come to them early enough for the support in your assignments, the help is absolutely there. And then, of course, there's the general academic staff as well. So if you're moving up to a diploma, you've whet your appetite, you really enjoyed your postgraduate certificate, and you decide to sign on for a couple more papers, you kind of cash in your postgrad certificate and work towards the postgrad diploma as a higher level qualification. So people that are looking at CVs that are largely familiar with the idea that a diploma is a higher level qualification than a certificate, and a master's is a higher level than a diploma. And so you take an additional 2 papers. And again, you could take any one from the RTRU suite of papers. And if there's one paper from somewhere else, it's at the diploma level that you could cross-credit that in. Maybe you did it something at the OT school, or the physio school, or in public health. You can include that as one of your papers and towards the postgrad diploma in rehabilitation. We also do strongly recommend that one of those papers is a research methods paper, though, because even if it feels like a very distant and wild fantasy that you might one day do a thesis, a master's, or a PhD, you do need a research methods paper. And we do regularly have students that say, oh, no, that was never going to be for me. And then they change their mind. And so then they've got to do an extra paper. So instead of doing 4 papers, they need to do 5 papers. Each one of those papers is currently about $3,000, just as a heads up. And so that is a bit of a factor to think about. Each one takes 1 semester to do, as I said a moment ago. And if people are working full-time or 4 days a week, which most of our students are, we would really recommend only doing 1 at a time. If you do more than 1 paper at a time, what tends to happen is people lose their grades. That's difficult to maintain a really high grade level while working full-time or nearly full-time and doing 2 papers. The exceptions are that as to when students are not working at all or only working very, very part-time, then that kind of situation can work really well. So we've talked about the first step, the certificate, the second step around the diploma. And so the third step is going to then onto a master's. You can continue to do this by coursework with coursework papers, but you do need to have done a postgraduate diploma no matter how you do your master's. So there's 2 ways of doing a master's at Otago. You can do a master's by thesis, which means you've done your diploma and you just do 1 thesis of 40,000 words, and that is a 1 year full-time work or 2 years part-time. Or you can do a master's by coursework, and in this instance you do another 2 papers on top of your diploma, any 2 papers, and people usually will have chosen at least 1 paper from outside of the RTRU at this point. Often they're developing quite a strong specialty by this point. And then do a 60-point dissertation, which is 20,000 words in length. So it's half the size of a thesis, and it takes half as long. So most of our students at the RTRU, because most of them work full-time or nearly full-time, most of them do a master's by thesis part-time over 2 years. And with a dissertation, when they're working on their dissertation, if they've gone down a coursework route, they would do that part-time over 1 year. So a typical scope for a master's by thesis would be 6 to 10 interviews with some sort of stakeholder, whether it's a consumer, person with lived experience, group, or health professionals, or they might do a survey, a reasonably sized survey. They would do their own data analysis, and you work really, really closely with a primary supervisor, somebody employed at the RTRU, and a secondary supervisor as well. You tend to meet the supervisor fortnightly, primary supervisor fortnightly. So it is quite a structured process, and it is quite a wraparound support from your primary supervisor, and then bringing in other people like Donna from the library and Ruth as needed along the way. Most of our master's students publish at least one publication from their work. I'd say 9 out of 10 of our students do that into the peer-reviewed literature. And then moving on to the PhD as a next step. As it says there, the PhD is 3 years of full-time work, and it's 80 to 100,000 words. So double the size of a master's. So just unpacking that pictorially a little bit more, as I said there. So your certificate, to recap, it definitely would be REHB 701, or you might make an argument to exchange the equivalent papers out of AUT, and then the other paper of your choice. And I've listed all the paper options there that we have within the RTRU. Now, there is a schedule of papers, it's called. It's not the most obvious name. If you Google schedule of papers for the RTRU, you will find a timetable for when each of those papers are running. We don't run them all the time, because we're a pretty niche population of students, so we tend to run them alternate years. So you do need to map out your study a little bit to make sure that you're able to take the papers that you want with, you know, the amount of gaps that you want to have in your study, or no gaps at all. And so from that point, you will add on to your certificate with another couple of papers, and it's not essential that one of them is the research methods, but we do recommend that. If you're adamant, I'm not going anywhere past the diploma, I'm just interested in these topics of interest, then by all means take 3 papers that pique your interest. There are, before I go into the research methods papers, just while we're talking about courses and course content, is there any questions in that regard? Okay, so again, so the research methods papers, this is a list of the ones that we recommend. There are a few more of them, but these are the ones that our students regularly take. They each have they're each on at different semesters. So this is something you're thinking about only from the diploma level, unless you're a total research geek and you want to actually kick off your postgraduate certificate with a research methods paper. People actually usually take this as their last paper in their diploma, because the major assignment in all of these papers is to write your research proposal for a master's. So you don't have to obviously go on and do the master's, but it does set you up very well for it. And they all take you through, even as a clinician, honestly, this is really useful and really interesting. So you learn to critically consume the research literature really well through this sort of paper, you come to understand what the methods in the methods section are trying to do and what its limitations are. And it's really helpful for sorting out a really good paper from a poor one. We do cover a bit of that in all of our courses, critical appraisal, but you go in depth with it in the research methods, and you actually have a go at a couple of the methods across the courses. So you take one of these papers, they're all 30 points. So as you can see, some of them relate to whether you're a physio or not, although non-physios have taken the physio paper, they do make an exception. There's a nursing course for people who are qualified as nurses. Most of our students take the AVME, which actually comes out of aviation medicine of all things, but it's an excellent paper. It's fully online, which often suits our students who've kind of gone down the online postgrad route. And it's all over and done within one semester. I know Julie speaks very highly of our graduates. You're well prepared to go into that paper by the time you get there. What else to say about those? They cover quantitative and qualitative methods. So you have a little bit of a go with statistical analysis software, and you have a go at analysing some qualitative data as well. And it's really interesting. Some people were sure they were going to do something quantitative, but do this paper and find how much they love the qualitative, and vice versa. Sometimes people who were sure that they were going to be a qualitative researcher with their masters and then find that they've just really enjoyed the quantitative analysis. So it's a good thing to explore. There are some reshuffles, especially with the current environment in the university. So when you're ready for this point, just Google it and check, or you can contact me and I'll send you the current list of papers that I keep a handy list of. This is currently current though. All of those courses take a really interprofessional group of students, which again adds to the richness of the course. Yeah. Okay, I've said all of that. Yes, take within your diploma if you can. There we go. So we've worked through the postgrad diploma and the research methods, and then just finally the masters. You've got a lot more options there, as we just talked through. So by coursework, you have an extra 2 papers, or by thesis, you just go ahead and do the whole thesis. So as I alluded to before, you're very much mentored through this process by your primary supervisor, and you should approach the supervisor that you are most you think would be most appropriate to your topic and that you enjoyed the teaching style of. That's a really good way to go to start with. And then they'll give you recommendations about the second supervisor. And if you are interested in that for next year, say for a February start, then that is something to start doing by now. Would be a good time to do it. The other thing just to flag with masters by thesis is that you can start in any month you want to. You're not sort of bound to the semesters like you are for the coursework. Dissertation is technically attached to the semester as well, but a thesis is not. So you end up paying by the month. You kind of pay a lump of the whole semester to start with, but when it gets to the finishing time, overall it works out that you only pay for the month that you study. If things are running over a little bit, you need a bit of extra time, you just negotiate that with your supervisor and you pay fees for a little bit longer, an extra month, an extra 3 months, until you're really satisfied with what you're submitting. So there's more flexibility at that thesis level. It sounds like a great big void when you say thesis and 2 years, big numbers like that, but it's actually very structured. You quickly set up a timeline for it, and then you work through the stages of the process. We also have a really strong peer group of about half a dozen students doing master's theses with us at the moment, and they meet together regularly and share tips and tissues and whatever else it might be needed as time goes. So how am I doing for time? Oh, right on time, 7:30. So before we go into a discussion about the scholarships for those who are at the their scholarships overall, is there any other questions around the coursework content or arrangement? Or did you? Sorry.
I have a question, but it's more.
So if you struggled, if a student gave it their level best and they really struggled with the diploma and they gave it everything they had and they got a B- or a C, then you're probably not going to enjoy a master's. But if, you know, if there was something major went down in family life or something like that that affected it, there are ways around it. Sometimes students were like, oh, look, that was my father died the day before the exam or whatever, and I didn't put in a dispensation thing, or not that there is an exam, but everything fell over for me, and so they take another paper. So you enroll in another research methods paper or the same one again and get a higher grade. The university is really only ever interested in your most recent grades, by the way, in case you've got a dark patch in your history of D- where you didn't turn up to any lectures. It doesn't matter. They're only ever interested in your most recent qualification and the grade that went with that.
Sorry, could you repeat the grades again? So I could, I'm taking notes now. So A for the research and then B+ average for the.
No, not that high. A B+ for the research methods and a B overall in the diploma.
Okay, all right,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep.
And then, sorry, one last question. If I do the nursing, the master's in nursing, and then I choose the rehab pathway, does that mean when I do my thesis, I get one of you to be my supervisor or not?
If you're doing a master's in nursing, you normally would get a supervisor from within nursing, the nursing school. Sometimes we might be the secondary supervisor on a dissertation or something, or even a thesis with the nurses. We would regularly partner with nurses around supervision. But yeah, essentially your qualification is with the same unit or program that your primary supervisor is with.
All right. Thank you very much for that.
Does that make sense?
Yes,
good questions. Great questions. Any other general questions about planning study? Okay, so we'll talk a little bit then about money. In terms of financial support for your papers at the certificate and postgraduate diploma level, you're really looking to going to your employers, your professional associations, charities. You can always try Lions and Rotary, but you know, family affiliations with lodges and things like that, guilds. Those are the kind of places that would provide financial support. Some, what were DHBs, some DHBs provide generous financial support to our students and some provide none. So it is worth asking around and asking your colleagues if anyone who has done postgraduate study before, what they might have found as ways of getting assistance. Sometimes there's local trusts that fund people. The other way that people gain financial support from their employers is having a frank conversation with their managers around what would be useful focuses in the study. So even at the certificate and the diploma level, through a lot of our papers, we invite students to choose a focal topic, so their own topic that they follow through. So for example, it might be something like goal setting, and that might be relevant across several of the papers that we offer. person-centered care, rapid response services, something like that, and you gain quite an in-depth knowledge about it across multiple papers. And we also encourage, as I said, our assignments are generally products that are applied. So for example, one of them, you literally work up a service proposal for a evidence-based innovative service that's cost effective and supported by research evidence. And so some people have negotiated in work time when the topic that they're focusing on is of interest, and they negotiate a kind of output that you give back to the service at the end of the course of study. So that would involve a bit of a conversation with the particular RTRU staff. It might be around submitting a conference presentation to profile the department or the unit that you're working in, which many of the courses have an assignment that would give you something to take to that. The assignments also line up really well with the CASP projects in the Te Whatu Ora system for salary progression for allied health. And there's equivalent kinds of things for nurses as well. So again, negotiating that, it means that you at least get some in-work time sometimes to work on your postgraduate study. Services vary publicly funded services vary widely in the amount of support they have for staff, whether they have dedicated study days or not, these kinds of things. So I encourage you to go in and negotiate firmly and, consider that as part of your employment preferences for where you are, because there is a lot of support out there in some areas, but it seems to be a bit of a foreign concept in other areas. So there's no scholarships as such at the coursework level. The one exception to that is there is a scholarship available at the master's level, even if you're doing it by coursework. They are very competitive. There are simply not very many of them. I don't mean to be discouraging, but we are looking at A+ straight students through their diploma to be eligible for a master's by coursework scholarship. The fact that people have a profession is counted as a negative against them. They think that, well, you have a profession, so you mustn't need the money very much. And so I'm afraid weighting is applied to that as well if you're in employment. It's definitely worth having a go though, and we do regularly advocate for you on your behalf to the university. So I'm going to go through, first of all, the Otago scholarships, and then the wider scholarships that are available. I just wanted to introduce you, first of all, to my colleague, Rochelle Martin. She runs a sort of support group for the master's students. She is one of our poster girls who came through our programs a few years ago, and much to her own surprise, went all the way from the certificate through to a PhD. We've talked a little bit about the support and structure. We're mindful that it's a big journey for a lot of people, and it's the first time for many people that they're stepping outside of their immediate environment or immediate professional environment to a national and international arena where you're really putting yourself on the stage and making your ideas more public and getting engaged in more public speaking and so on. And where there's a big team around you to support you as you do that. And of course, you can do that to a greater or lesser degree as much as you want. So that's Rochelle, and she runs that side of the RTRU support once you get to the master's and PhD levels. Now, in terms of potentially moving on to a PhD, it is better to do a master's by thesis than to do a master's by coursework. You can do either, but a master's by thesis makes you more eligible essentially for PhD scholarships. It also makes you more eligible for master's scholarships. It's easier to get a master's thesis scholarship than it is to get a master's dissertation scholarship. Largely because essentially the government pays the university for producing publications and producing thesis graduates. They give lump sums of money to the university based on those two things, and so we get a lump of money. The university gets a lump of money for masters by thesis, not so much money for a dissertation because it's just sort of seen as a large paper. That doesn't make any sense probably at all, but just that there's a money trail to follow around this preferential treatment of thesis graduates or thesis students. So Otago has scholarships available, as I said, at the master's level and at the PhD level. It's actually easier to get a PhD scholarship than it is to get a master's scholarship. So because most people more people go as far as a master's and few people go on to a PhD. So it is a little bit less competitive once you get to the PhD level. We are still talking in the A range graduates. So things have become more competitive since COVID. So in the last year, we have had students who had all A's and A pluses and 1 A minus in their diploma and 3 peer-reviewed publications already out there, and they did not get a scholarship. So in the past, we have said if you have an A minus, you are still in the running to get a scholarship, especially if you've published. And I would still encourage people to submit if you're in that kind of boat, but we're really looking at the A and A plus range of the diploma. Now, if you have a bummed out, we actually often have students that don't do as well in their first paper with us, but then they see what the standard is and they get their mojo going, and they see how get back in the study groove, and they do really well in the other papers. You can repeat a paper if you're really determined and you really wanted to do it. Obviously, that comes with another cost, but that, remember that is an option. I can only really apologise that at the level of competitiveness for these scholarships, because we have some excellent A minus average students. A student that gets an A minus average has done an excellent job. They are absolutely capable of being a researcher and being a fabulous researcher and a fabulous academic. It just reflects the level of competition for those scholarships. You can, of course, do it without a scholarship. So a master's by thesis costs about $10,000–11,000 in fees. So it's just a bit less than 4 papers, which is what it's the equivalent of, and what it costs. The Otago scholarships for PhDs and masters, the biggie thing with them is that they waive your fees. So if you get a scholarship, it means that they waive your fees. They allow you to do it without paying any fees. So that's the major cost savings. They do also come with a small living allowance of, was it $13,000 or so? And so in the last year, we have had straight A plus students had their fees waived, but were given no stipend, no living allowance. So even you can't do better than an A plus average, but because many of our students have a health professional qualification, they make an opinion and a decision that you mustn't need the money as someone else who doesn't have a qualification. I'm only talking at the moment about Otago scholarships. I'll talk a little bit more widely about other scholarships as well. They have tried on some fronts to make it more supportive for women, and so they do now provide, whether you're part-time or full-time, won't make any difference to your eligibility for the scholarship, because they recognise that part-time is the only way that many women are going to study. There are specific categories in scholarships for Māori and Pacifica to massively build capacity of our Māori and Pacifica researchers, which we absolutely need. So that's been really important to do. To apply for the scholarships, all you do is tick a box in your application for Masters and PhD. And they purely look at your grade point average in making that decision. There is a small number that go to a panel discussion, but they are very, as I say, there's just so many. There's double, there's a third of those that go to panel actually get a scholarship. So they're subscribed 3 times over for people in that A- kind of range, essentially. That's what we're looking at. Now, one other thing to think about if you're wanting to kind of try and game it towards scholarships, is to look at the University of Otago's strategic plan and the Health Sciences strategic plan, and plan a project that aligns with that, with those priority objectives. These also tend to align with the major New Zealand health strategies as well. I can tell you now that there's a really strong focus on equity and advancing understandings for Māori and Pacifica populations as well. It doesn't have to be Māori and Pacifica, but a really strong focus on access and equity. You do this in collaboration with, once you're at this point of applying for scholarships and enrolling in a master's, you would have already, the first thing you'll do is contact your potential supervisor and have a discussion, and they will help you with your research methods final assignment to draft up your proposal for your proposed course of study. And if you want to apply for a scholarship, then the head of the unit, which is me this year, be Jean next year, will write a letter supporting your application, assuming that the primary supervisor is really supportive and keen to have you as a student. There are a couple of specialty scholarships at Otago, one around mental health and addiction, if that's a topic area of interest. And there's also one for physiotherapy, for physiotherapists. And this is because there was a bequest made by somebody at some stage in their will around these particular topics. There's all sorts of rather random niche topics around what somebody wanted to donate money for. These are the facts that I've just gone through. These figures shift slightly every year. There is a little bit of advantage in not applying in November, December. So because that is when the bulk of people perhaps that are studying full time would apply so that they can carry on their full time study and start in the new year. So although they do some adjustment of distribution of the scholarships, and they recognise that there's going to be a lot some months and less in other months, it is more competitive outside of that end of year. It is less competitive outside of that those end of year months. So it's still very competitive, and there's still a fair bit of luck in it, but that might help. So beyond Otago, I will just say that there are no fees for New Zealand citizens to do theses in Australia. So if I was your auntie fee, I would say think about that. You can do a master's thesis or a PhD thesis in Australia with no fees. New Zealanders are still eligible for some scholarships in Australia as well. The same is not true of Australians who come here, or even of New Zealanders who are here in terms of exemption for fees, but the Australian government has approached it differently. So that might be something to think about when if you're on a real career path towards research and you're weighing these things up, you should think about that. You still have to find a supervisor and build relationships and all of that sort of thing, but that is an option. So here is a list of other scholarships that are hosted by Otago for Otago students. They're all listed here. Here are some that are available, and the number of pluses I've put there indicates the number of scholarships available for those specialty situations. So there's a couple related to people with disabilities. This includes dyslexia, learning disability, ADHD, and we do regularly have our students that have these kinds of health conditions. So these might be an option. There is Fanny Evans Scholarship. We have certainly had students in the past who were successful with that. It's around women returning to study. If you happen to have a degree in medicine, there are a lot of scholarships you could apply for. Even if it was in a previous life or anything, this is a good time to pull out your degree in medicine. And of course, Māori and Pacifica ethnicity. There are a range of specialty scholarships available, and there are special categories within the general Otago scholarship for Māori and Pacifica as well. So external, so there is this database. If you go to this address up here within the Otago website on scholarships, and you plug in any special characteristic about yourself or the topic you're interested in, and you just, it's amazing, it's very much like Google. Type in your key term, and it will come up with the scholarships associated with that criteria or characteristic of yourself. And there's also a website that is generic across universities, and that might give you some other wider options. If it's not in the Otago website, it's probably, well, you never know, it's definitely worth a look, but it might be only available for studying somewhere else. Apart from the Otago scholarships, which are all based on grade, the other scholarships are based on niche criteria, and that's because the scholarship has been, it's much easier to manage a scholarship fund when you have a relatively small number of applicants, and you make it small by having very narrow criteria. And people tend to donate around their special interests. There are also a range of funds. Now I've put here some of the allied health ones because that's what many of our students are, but there will be, whatever your affiliation is, there is often a small fund, and you get a few $1,000s which can go towards covering some of your costs. It might be around, the Stroke Foundation, Pediatric Society, or around your professional association. And of course, your employers. You are ultimately developing skills that you will use in your workforce. Sometimes people kind of give the message that, well, it's just for your personal career advancement. Well, depends on what kind of topic you do, maybe. And if you can negotiate and convince your employer that the topic that you're doing is going to make you much better at doing your job, and they're going to benefit from it, then you might be able to get them to get involved. I do see it happen quite regularly, and still, that people are supported by their employer, including the New Zealand public health system. So just a little bit of information about timelines here. If you are thinking of approaching your employer about funding, you need to get onto that pretty quickly. To enroll in any of our coursework, or for a February start, that's when the semester starts, you need to enroll by the 10th of December. That might just shift a little bit, but basically that second week in December, if you're not enrolled by then in your course options for the following semester 1 next year, you get a late penalty of $100 or so. When you go to enroll, you will need a copy of your academic transcript. So the actual printout of your grades and qualifications from your last institution that you studied with. This might take some time, especially if it's coming from overseas. and especially if that institution has now folded, they usually have some sort of system for digging that out, but it might take you a wee while to get that. If you are looking towards enrolment in a master's or a PhD directly, and you did your coursework elsewhere, the supervisor that you approach will usually ask you put you through a couple of little exercises to test your abilities and your sort of writing skills and your critical appraisal and that sort of thing, just so that they can be making an informed choice about what level of support that you're going to need. And it's important that you get a sense of what your supervisor expects as well. Yeah, so that timeline there, it is laid out for a February start, but you might want to think about that in terms of what I've just said about the competitiveness of the scholarship panels in that sort of November, December period. And remember, for masters and PhD, you only actually pay by month. You only end up paying by month. You can start any month you like. Definitely start at the start of the month because you're going to be paying fees for the whole month. If things come up during your thesis, 2 years is a long time for a commitment, you can take deferrals, so you can pause it. It does just mean that you're also pausing access to the library databases and your email address, your student email address. But there are times in your thesis where for one thing, you might completely want to clock off and have an absolute break. Life comes up, but you might also want to just buy yourself a bit of extra time to work independently on some writing, on a writing phase is sometimes done as well. Yeah, usually once, or in exceptional circumstances twice, a deferral would be considered. They don't just hand them out willy-nilly, but it is possible. Finally, a few links that you might find useful. If you have trained internationally, then you might want to check out the international office. There are really transparent information about the grade requirements and how to convert grades from other institutions. So this is if you are thinking of going straight into a thesis and you maybe did a master's somewhere else. This is not relevant if you're thinking of going straight from into a paper with us in a certificate, postgraduate certificate. If you have a diploma too, sorry, just for those coming straight in, and you trained in it at a time where you had a diploma in occupational therapy or nursing, we do recognise that as adequate entry. It doesn't have to be a degree or a bachelor that you had from your original qualification, just to take our postgraduate papers. If you've got any questions, give us a shout or contact our generic email address, rtru@otago, and the lovely Susan will give you a hand and talk you through what it is you might need. But otherwise, that's it from me formally tonight. I'm going to stop recording and welcome you to get in touch if you have any questions.